Get rolling. Folks that want to roll in.
Yeah, excellent.
Hey, folks online. We're I think gonna get rolling here in the room. Yeah, thank you guys for joining. So in the room we've got myself and Carter from the city and Jolie Ansari, local architect and good guy. And let's see online. You want to do a quick introduction? There's Cece. Uh, Dana there. We'll get back to her. Whoever's on iPhone. All right. Okay. Yeah. Thank you guys for coming along. Yeah, we had met yesterday, went through the same stuff and good productive meeting. The first item we had on the agenda, I guess we should do the formality. Would somebody like to make a motion that the agendas were posted in the appropriate places?
Joel Mazzari here. I will make a motion to approve the adequate posting for the meeting.
Okay. Second? Anybody?
That's you, Cece. Your mic's off.
You're muted, Cece, you're trying to.
Thank you guys. Sorry, I was trying to get unmuted. I second that.
Yeah. All in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
Aye.
There we go. We got another voice there.
So then, yeah, the first item we had was just the overview of our September engagement efforts. We kicked off at Labor Day, had a booth there. It seemed like a pretty good turnout and engagement. There were a lot of folks just kind of circling through. We had these chalkboards up that we would change the prompt out every once in a while, let people kind of fill in the blanks as we went along. I think we filled that up 3 or 4 times. And then just, yeah, a lot of conversations with folks, they wanted to chat with us. Then we got a survey up on the website. These are gonna be a monthly kind of theme thing. This one was on existing conditions, so really kind of a snapshot of how we're doing currently. And I'm hoping that we can kind of start doing this annually and kind of get a trend of progress as a local government going. First question we have is how they want to take survey, if it's in English or Spanish. We have one person start the survey in Spanish, but then didn't complete it. So that is a challenge that we're working on. I really enjoy feedback from anybody on how we can better reach the Spanish speaking portion of the community. And yesterday's group suggested going to the churches and some of those more influential community members within the Hispanic community.
I would suggest going to Lucy's and the store in that little strip mall there right next door. And any one of the Hispanic, featured or focused businesses, and just ask them, and then see if we can post something there or.
Yeah, I was planning on doing tabling and a few of those over the course of this.
Hi, Brian. This is Carissa.
Hey.
So we have tabled, we've had someone posted at the Hunger Coalition before, a bilingual person with the survey and tablet. Sometimes it's really helpful for folks to be able to walk them through the actual survey. We've left paper surveys before and still found that it's helpful to have someone who can actually walk through the survey, just because some of the language and the lingo is different in different dialects. And so the meaning isn't necessarily always that apparent. We've also had good luck. We asked a few years ago, Herbert Romero went door knocking for us at some of the manufactured homes and was able to get 50 signatures that way. But he literally would sit with people and go through the survey with them.
Yeah, Hunger Coalition's good call. We had a representative on the advisory committee from there. She's no longer working at the Hunger Coalition. But we're gonna get a replacement fill in for her, but yeah, tabling there is a great idea. I met Romero at the Hispanic Heritage Festival a couple weeks ago. Hoping to kind of loop him in on this as well. Yeah, that's great.
Awesome.
Oh,
And I know another, it's a little bit funky, but one group that we have tapped into sometimes when we just need to have more volunteers, and especially volunteers that are bilingual. Heather Aaron with the LDS Church, she's really good at wrangling people. So if Romero needed more boots on the ground, or he's also tapped in there, like he brings in Edith. But that's just sort of if you need more people to actually physically door knock or anything like that.
could you say the person's name again at the
He-
LDS Church?
Heather, I can she's a texter or phone call person, so I can send you her contact info.
Cool, yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah.
DC?
I was just also gonna suggest Laura Rico. She does Spanish translation as well as graphic design, and she's a Bellevue resident. I'm spacing on her husband's name. Her husband's a native speaker, but she's a very fluent Spanish and English speaker and very skilled linguistically. She has really reasonable translation rates as well. And she can translate in person or written in documents. And then also just a reminder to fall back on Kristen Gerhart at the library. She interacts with so many Spanish speaking residents in Bellevue. When I was doing work with her via mountain rides, we had interaction and I was using my Spanish every day to speak with Spanish speaking families there. If you want, I can connect you with Laura Rico over email.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Then the next question was just kind of how they are connected with Bellevue. Majority of respondents were residents, a handful work in Bellevue, and this was a check all that apply, so they can fit more than one box. But yeah, it's primarily Bellevue residents. They're filling out the survey. We got a total of 43 responses. I don't know if I mentioned that. I would like more, but at the APA conference last week, we were talking with the Nampa staff that said they, in their comp-plan outreach, got about 500 responses out of the town of 120,000. So I think 43 out of 2,700 is
Better ratio.
a much better ratio. So I think we're doing all right, but I would still like that to be closer to 100 or more. And then how long have you been connected to Bellevue? I was hoping to get some demographic data. The yesterday's group suggested using Sun Valley Economic Development for this, of how long people have, or when they recently moved to Bellevue, how long they've lived here, et cetera. Kind of compare, see if we're getting a representative sample of them, but the majority of the respondents are fairly new to town. Then kind of goes all over the place from there, up to 51 years, I think was our top responder. But almost 600 years of total experiences with Bellevue, you take some of them. Then we had a block question that was how strongly do you agree with the following statements? The first one was I feel safe and welcome in Bellevue. The vast majority felt they agreed or strongly agreed with that statement. Nobody disagreed with it, which is great. Bellevue is a great place to live. We had one person disagree with that statement and everybody else was at least neutral or better.
Did anybody comment on their neutral or their disagree?
There was a comment box at the end of the block of questions, so that it isn't super clear like which topic they're referring to, but there were some comments, mostly relating to code enforcement infrastructure, that sort of I think we only had 5 or 6 people fill out the comment box at the bottom. We're gonna get into more of this in this month's outreach and survey. I know my neighbors was one of the questions. We didn't really ask you how strongly they knew that, if they felt comfortable borrowing a cup of sugar, etc. It was just, I know my neighbors, and both folks agreed with that statement. Nobody felt like they didn't know anybody. Then this was where we got into the negative. I feel well served by Bellevue's infrastructure, which not terribly surprising. We kind of expect that response. But there were some that were neutral or agreed with it. Nobody strongly agreed. So we're doing great, but some people agreed. I am confident they'll still be in Bellevue in 5 years. I was not really expecting this response. I think given cost of living and changes in the community, I was expecting it to be lower than this, but most folks felt fairly confident that they would continue to be here. I think that may be a little bit of sample bias of who's responding to the survey. We're getting more homeowners, more established members of the community. They're going to be more established, more stable. Chris, I'd be curious if you guys have kind of researched this, given, you know, cost of living as being a big factor, rental prices and things like that. How much stability people feel and how secure they're feeling.
I think our questions are generally more direct in terms of, are you seeking or expecting to need new housing in the
Yeah.
next 2 years? And then we ask more specific questions within that. So we do have that data and can break it down for Bellevue as well.
Yeah.
And I think we actually, we just wrapped up a survey that I think asked that question again. And that was a countywide survey. So why don't I check on that? Because we might have 2023 data and then data from August and September.
Yeah.
If it's helpful.
Yeah, it'd be definitely helpful.
Okay.
Something, I think Chris is more involved than we are in this, but and Brian, you might be familiar that the Hunger Coalition is taking a closer look at cost of living. And something we connected them with the MIT's Living Wage Institute folks, because we were finding that the Living Wage Institute was using HUD data to calculate living wages, and the HUD data for housing costs here, as Chris is more familiar with, is like, I don't know, like 40 to 50% of actual what BCHA is finding and what the actual market rate rents are. So yeah, you might try following up with, I think Linnea or Brooke is the point person on that right now. I don't know how far along they are with that. They did like a study with, maybe it was Boise State or U of I, but I know they're continuing that effort to get a better grasp on actual cost of living, and they're moving forward with the Mountain or MIT.
Yeah, I looked at that and I think, if I remember right, it was like half of southern Idaho was kind of their area that they were pulling data from for cost of living. I mean, that's not gonna be terribly represented, but yeah, they're working on more concentrated localized data. That'd be great. I'll check in with Hunger Coalition on that.
Yeah, I think the contract with MIT, and I don't know how they get to their living wage number and how deep they go into cost of living, but with MIT, they're just looking at Blaine County.
And then the last question in the block was that they are proud to be part of Bellevue. Again, most of the respondents agreed with the statement. There were a couple that agreed or strongly disagreed. But yeah, the comment block, or the comments, available for folks to fill out, that they we're proud to be part of the community, enjoy being in Bellevue, they want better infrastructure, and code enforcement. Then I asked what their normal commute time in minutes was. There's a definite bucketing of they work in Bellevue or Haley, they work in Ketchum. They work in Ketchum plus road construction and or work somewhere else. But for the most part, yeah. Was what I expected. Then I had a couple of open-ended fill in the blank or, comment box type responses that SurveyMonkey has a tool that categorizes them into response character categories. Asked what the favorite thing about Bellevue was, access to outdoor spaces and community character and identity were the big two, and then there were a few others. Block Avenida has come up a lot as a thing that people really like. Then the something Bellevue could improve upon, same thing, fill in the blank, open-ended response. Street infrastructure, commercial development, walkability, water and sewer infrastructure were the big ticket items, but this was a lot more spread out than the other one. So that was the end of the survey. Other things they did. We're gonna get into a minute. We had their first meeting of the youth advisory committee. I sat at the table at Atkinson's for an hour or two. That was whoever was not busy enough to want to talk to me. Anything else? Media club having their first meeting in October.
I'm planning on doing some more tabling with this month and probably Brian too, so.
So that was it for the outreach update. The second part of the meeting, go away. I'll share the screen here. Was working through the vision and plan framework. The youth advisory committee was tasked with developing this. We have a total of 2 high school students on there at the moment. We'd like more, but we started off with what we got, and they did a great job with putting this together. Asked them to just kind of work through in the year 2050, which is the target year for the plan, what they want Bellevue to have and to become. And then additionally, we also asked them, what are some things that would make them want to stay here rather than move out of the area? And what are some things that they need in order for that to be a feasible option for them? So what came up with for a vision statement is the Bellevue is a community that is accommodating and supportive to a diverse spectrum of residents, has tremendous access to nature and public space, community gathers and is together, is well served by infrastructure and a variety of transportation systems, and a town where residents can work in Bellevue. And then from that, we got these kind of key theme items. In bigger text italicized. Yesterday's group got into pretty good policy discussion underneath kind of some of these categories. There was a lot of talk on how we're supposed to have gathering spaces and places that people can feel like a community, converse with their neighbors, be outside and have access to open space and outdoors. And the conflict of airplanes flying overhead periodically and disrupting conversations, semi trucks on the highway and that sort of stuff, was a big piece of that. It was really great having, Tim Burke from the airport there yesterday, kind of talk through realities of airport administration and management and what options may or may not be available. But I was able to get some notes and I would not have thought of considering noise issues directly under gathering community spaces. The yesterday's group kind of, they didn't like my grammar very well, so I need to refine the wording of the vision statement a little bit, so it is a more proper sentence. But we discussed the word accommodating and whether that was appropriate. It seemed like there was support for using that rather than accessible or welcoming or and where that came from was the students wanted to make sure that it was a place that people could live their entire lifespan within it, and also have people coming. That was kind of the accommodating and supportive language. This part, the group thought was funky. The community gathers ideas together, needed for grammatical refinement.
So the point is, we're gonna have a vision statement or a
Yeah.
mission statement
Yeah.
down the road. I took this as, it was the first pass of some high school kids,
Yeah.
right? And so, yesterday's group, today's group, yes, it needs to be wordsmithed. It has some things that make you go, right? Makes you wanna think about it. I actually stopped on the word accommodating, and I was like, okay, that's interesting. What is it really trying to say? All right. I have my own opinion of what accommodating is, which is let you do what you want to do and doesn't bother you, and you go on your way. Is that a good thing? All right. And in some regards, many people think it is. Other mindsets of the word accommodating means it's a free-for-all, that the Wild West, do what you want to do. So I'm not saying it's the right word, wrong word, good word, bad word, but it stopped me. And so those types of things repeat in all these sentences. Diverse spectrum of residents. So I know what that's I believe I know what that's trying to say, but there's ways that things are being said here that are common society buzzwords have gone, what are you really trying to say? So break it down and say it more succinctly than using these broad general terms. So yes, I thought it was fine as a first pass, but we need to go through it down the road. I don't know if it's now, but it's kind of one of those of going, when things are so touchy-feely and so broad, they don't mean anything, It leaves too much up for interpretation.
I mean, that's the vision statement is the thesis of the plan, and then from there we break down these individual words into 100 pages of document,
And
right? And so, it's going to come out pretty broad, I think, no matter what we do, but yeah, I think where like there's something very specific we want to say, we should say it.
then if that's what we're gonna do, you sold me by saying that. So therefore, I'm joking by saying, do you underline, do you color, do you italicize to say, here's our 7 mantra words, and this whole document is gonna ring back to those 7 key words. And if the word is accommodating, we're gonna define it, and it's gonna break into 7 pieces. And so if that's the power of whatever these words are gonna be, then we have to follow that theme through.
Right, so these key themes, my plan was to kind of make those the chapter headings.
Yeah.
And really, define them, establish policies and goals related to being accommodating and diverse and having public spaces and nature and existing.
Well, then I missed the obvious, and so therefore, something about tying the two together, clobbering me over the head. Cause maybe I'm a good cross-section profile of layman of going, I didn't pick up that the key themes were literally the building of your vision statement. You know, I see it now, but somehow I missed that.
Cece?
Yeah, I think picking up on maybe some of the feedback you guys got yesterday and what Julian was saying, I do think that the sentence structure and the grammar kind of muddies a strong message with good bones. So I think, and I don't know what it's called. It's been ages since I was in school thinking about grammar, but just specifically with like here I'm trying to zoom in. Using like making sure that the verbs for each clause cohere and are yeah.
I told them I would diagram the sentence. Uh, I don't, I don't intend to actually do that.
Mhm.
That's not how to do it since I learned how to do it 20 years ago in high school. Yeah, I'm glad it's gonna get refined to make sure that all the tenses and I forget what the term is, but that I'm talking about the future and the present and all that consistently are matching.
Yeah, I think other than that, I think it's a comprehensive vision statement that touches on a wide range of important aspects in planning, and I'm as someone who doesn't live in Bellevue, reluctant to weigh in any more than that.
Carissa?
Yeah, I agree. I think it might be helpful to get feedback on the specific words that you're going to be using as the themes throughout. Because just in hearing the discussion today, it was like, oh, I don't think of the word accommodating. I think of the word accommodating as like the most docile form of welcoming or accessible or and so I think there's just like different ways that people think of the words, and getting a sense for that could help refine the word choice.
Yeah,
Okay.
this is Dana. I would totally agree with what's already been said about the word accommodating. I don't usually think of cities, city infrastructure, city rules and laws, and as being accommodating. I don't I'm so I would be really curious because I think I mean these are high school kids. I'm very impressed with what they've come up with as a draft. I mean, wow. But I would just be interested to hear more about what they were actually thinking about in terms of accommodating. Were they using accommodating just as a different form of accessibility potentially? That's all.
Was accessible, I think, originally, and then yesterday we switched to accommodating.
No, it was it's been.
Oh, it's always, okay, I think we used accessible at some point in the key theme title. I would be supportive of just saying Bellevue is a community that is supportive of diversity or something like that.
Yeah, I could see that getting to what it seems like is trying to be said, because when I this is me with my housing hat on, like an accommodation is specific to individuals, whereas accessible tends to be broader. So someone might come and ask for like an accommodation, and that's specific to them. Whereas something that's accessible is, it's an accessible ramp, and so it can be used by different people, but then that's still limiting. So there's like universal design, and there's just like all these different layers that go into those words, whereas supportive captures all of that and doesn't really go into the details as much.
Okay, iPhone.
Oh, this is Kim. Sorry, it's not showing up
Yeah,
as me.
excuse me.
Hi. Everybody has some really good thoughts and I agree with all of that. I know AI, I kind of have this love-hate thing with it, but I mean, it seems like that would be so helpful, in making this clunky sentence more cohesive.
Yeah. It's easy.
Yeah, I totally see what Chris is saying in terms of terms that are more widely applicable and like kind of more commonly used in best practices when talking about like community-wide and population-wide like or like addresses or solutions or programs that address a whole community or population. I do kind of wonder if you guys got when I read accommodating, I didn't have as much of an issue with it because it did land with me like when I think of accommodating, I think of like hosting someone at my house and making them feel comfortable. And I wonder if that was popular because of a small town feel. So that's something you might ask around with Bellevue residents about if if accommodating resonated because it made they wanted people to feel kind of welcomed in a homey interpersonal way in a small town.
Yeah, it's funny that Carissa using housing brain was going a direction with accommodating because I'd intentionally not put accessible because of planner brain going straight to her branch. And so yeah, no matter what, somebody's gonna have a industry specific vernacular associated with the word.
I'd split it into 2 or more sentences.
Yeah,
I think it's just one big run-on sentence.
it is.
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah, I think you could, if we wanted to like kind of expand the first statement a little bit, it could be Bellevue is a community that is accommodating or supportive or whatever of a diverse. Somehow say it's diversity of ages, socioeconomic profiles and ranges and racial groups, ethnicities, etc. Kind of we could break it down to make it more specific. I don't know what the
My brain normally goes there, and then at the same time, if you do it too short, right? And unfortunately, the word diversity, politically or socially can mean things to other people that's a turnoff, right? And therefore, there's a fine balance between a little bit of each, succinct, but maybe a smidgen more to define what those points were that you were hedging towards.
Yeah, yeah. And
I do
one of
also
Diane Shea's favorite comments on comp planning is that it's supposed to read like the Bible. And so, you pull a verse and you can kind of make it mean what you want to be a little bit, except for where it needs to be.
Well, then under the premise, when you get to your themes, then their themes are where it's gonna be defined.
Yeah.
So to me, it's just break it into some better sentence structure, revisit the wording, so it's just a wordsmith exercise for another round for the vision.
So I think
But it covers the topics.
maybe there'll be a special edition survey and outreach of once we get it wordsmith a little bit better.
Brian, just an idea about the accommodating word and moving away from industry specific vernacular, whether it be for transportation or housing. Did the term welcoming come up at all?
We discussed it briefly yesterday that Genoa thought that accommodating was a nice, like, halfway point between accessible and welcoming.
Okay.
That was about the extent of it.
Yeah.
I have no problem if we decided to use one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, welcoming is also frequently used. I mean, to me, it still has really positive associations, but.
Okay, any other thoughts on specific vision statement items, language, etc. Okay. So yeah, these lines underneath each of the key themes were items brought up by the committee yesterday of policy areas that we should be considering within those key themes. I added Julia, accommodating as live and let live, if that's something we want.
That's pretty good.
Um, anything you guys would like to add to the list?
Well, we're for gathering and the one above it, which is the
Yeah.
public spaces.
Yep.
Because of my profession, you know, I'm all about running Bellevue through the filter to say, what are our public spaces, right? Meaning, what's our vision for them, and what made people feel that there was gathering going on. Now, I can agree with the new restaurant, and I come by there on Saturday and the lady's doing the catering in the back and there's 30 people having a good time under the patio. That's become an obvious gathering space, but that's a private business doing it. And if we promote the private businesses to do it, wonderful, they become the gathering spaces, part of the community. But how we define our public spaces and gathering spaces, that's where we need to have that vision for the design of Main Street, connecting to our park, because you made a comment, connecting to, the city park over here on the east versus down the hill to the, preserve and so forth. So I guess my point is master plan, we'll be master planning those things in our words so that the P and Z commission will make ways to incentivize creating those, because I certainly don't see them here yet, or very much.
Part of what Brian brought up to council yesterday in our work session on city right of ways. Was that our streets are, and the right of ways themselves are public spaces. And so I think part of that is recognizing that all of our right of ways are public space and they can advance the goals that we put out for public space. So I think incorporating like right of ways in there, yeah.
So that makes me think in a positive way, because infrastructure was not infrastructure, but the way I took it in some of those survey comments about our roads, and once you leave Main Street, we don't have a circulation network that is visually or friendly in a strong way, linking our residential neighborhoods to each other and to the park and to Main Street. And I was involved years ago with Ketchum when the street that Desperados is on that goes up through Atkinson's by the coffee shop, they get their little plaza park on the corner. And to see it years later, but to remember what it was before, it's promoted a sense of some additional walkability and vitality, probably not to the degree we hoped it would, but I think there's something in these two categories that we will define later on, how that is the 20-year plan for Bellevue to establish the north-south one along the highway, because right now it's just flat, boring sidewalks, but if the restaurants and the public spaces mutually engage to whatever that streetscape connectivity is, bulb outs, seating areas, different lighting, different plantings, all these things will come to be, but we just need to go through defining and breaking down these categories to come up with words that describe that vision.
Chris?
It just in relation to gathering spaces and the idea of, oh, are they private, are they public? I wouldn't want third spaces to be left behind either, like support of the library and that sort of thing, where it's not necessarily private, but it's also not fully, like, it closes at night, but those are the sort of free open spaces that a lot of places are losing or privatizing. And I think that is a detriment to a lot of community members, even if it isn't really that prominently discussed. And then the other comment that I had was on living and working within the community and quality infrastructure. I don't think I see anything about affordable housing that's affordable in there.
I was planning on getting into that, yesterday's group did not discuss it at all, but yeah.
Okay. And honestly, like some places are putting that under like that is a form of infrastructure. If you're thinking, okay, well, we can't have a community or our community cannot live here if there's not, you know, utilities, but also not housing. And sometimes that framing can be almost more productive than thinking of it as like a social handout.
Right. And when you think of the infrastructure required to make Bellevue function, a big chunk of that is Highway 75 goes way out of town of detention. Right, like that
Yeah.
is, that is an infrastructure component that if we could make it easier for people to live where they work and work where they live, then we can provide better infrastructure in a smaller frame.
For sure.
It's easy. Oh, you're muted.
Thanks. In addition to infrastructure, and that emphasis on quality infrastructure, I think like what you just mentioned, mobility, is a good word to mention. And that could be that could help include transit initiatives. And then could you zoom out a little bit? I saw accessibility mentioned several times and it seemed like it with different contexts, so it might be good to like hone that in or be more specific or like add more, contextualize accessibility. Like when we're talking about it, are we talking about public access to nature in different points? Are we talking about housing attainability? Are we talking about um, transportation needs and mobility needs? Um, and then another point that I was thinking about, yeah, I think I was kind of wondering about aviation and noise management under gathering and sense of community. I could see the relation there, but I could also see the relation to other like buckets on there. And so I think putting a little bit more thought into um, how the plan wants to address quality of the environment and environmental quality. Um, Also, the plan might want to call out environmental quality in general, because in addition to like noise management, you could also address water quality under environmental quality. And oh gosh, I had one more thought, but when I think of gathering and sense of community, something that excites me about Bellevue is like economic development opportunities. And I think also Bellevue residents have gotten very excited in recent years with new businesses in Bellevue, whether it be the building materials thrift store or the ice cream pop-up trailer in front of the hotel. And so, yeah, I just think that should be something mentioned with gathering and sense of community. Although it could also, again, fit under different buckets.
Yeah, and I think there's going to be a lot of things that fall under more than one category and kind of cross-reference each other.
It was neat, what I already learned today is I didn't realize such a bias I have for what a word might mean because of who I am and my background, right? I just never thought of it that way. I thought accessibility, of course, means ADA and, curb ramps and whatever it is, but yes, it can mean all these other things. I know it's obvious, but I'm just saying to a degree, wow, I've opened up my my visor. And therefore, a play on the word accessibility that I would add in maybe two of these categories of how it means to me circulation and connectivity. And so I see Main Street as our primary arterial connector component for all the things that we're talking about, actual physical circulation, visual, community identifying aspects to it. But then you get to just north of the building material thrift store, and then you drop down to Broadford, that's another hub street that's connecting us east and west. There's the hub that goes out towards, not Slaughterhouse, but the next one, Muldoon. And so there's this interesting connectivity, but then it's discovery to get to the preserve. You know, there isn't this cross connection to another huge asset. So I'm technical on that. But connectivity and circulation. And then a comment, let's see if it plugs in somewhere, but it has optimism in it. I'm reading a 1982, 1983 Sun Valley magazine that I bought at the building material thrift store for $1. So I bought 4 of them. And it was talking about the owners of the Neatery in Ketchum, and they had just come from San Francisco. I think it was the Neatery owner, and they bought the Silver Dollar restaurant when they moved here back then. And it said why they bought the Silver Dollar, and the other person today mentioned the third place, and bars fall into that, you know, for certain folks. And they described the Silver Dollar back then as kind of this hunters outdoorsmen enclave. And I was like, that's a different cultural group than when I moved here that hung out at the Silver Dollar, even though I hung out there on weekend nights. But they had a vision, the Neatery owners, of why they bought it, that Bellevue was going to be the town with the greatest amount of growth, right? And that was in 1982, 83. So they dabbled in Ketchum, they dabbled in Haley, but they believed that Bellevue was where it was going to be. They already knew Ketchum was established. That was just interesting that they had a vision for us in 1982, 83 as more, I think, of what the town Haley has become, which is the Valley people's hometown. So it's just neat that somebody else had that vision to go, well, that's what we're talking about, what our next vision is for the next 20 or 30 years.
Yeah. Yeah, you wouldn't mind sharing that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I expect there's some relativity to it that, you know, in 82, I don't think there were a whole lot of folks here. The town was on septic. You know, like,
But there was a different buzz back then, because this is a promotional magazine of our lifestyle in the valley. And so that magazine was covering how important it was to go to Silver Creek in the South Valley was a fun place to recreate and go, going to Magic to go windsurfing and catamaran sailing. And that was a big hub, and there was, you know, shows filmed there, competitions. So there was a different time of the South Valley being a hub that you just didn't pass through going north. There was a draw to the South Valley, kind of this outdoors lifestyle.
yeah,
Is the way I picked up what the magazine was talking about at that time.
I wonder if the phrase public spaces, nature and accessibility could just read accessibility to public spaces and nature. Yeah.
yeah, other than my spelling, Cece?
Forgive me if I'm not seeing it all, but something that's pretty present in the current plan, but I'm not seeing here, is an emphasis on natural resources and wildlife management. And I think that's an important thing for all the cities in the county, and especially like working at the land trust that works so closely with all the government entities, just because of so much of our footprint of development does exist in this precious gravel bed river floodplain where all of our native wildlife depends on access to that at some point in their life cycle. So it's a good thing to bring up. And just the seasonal nature of our access to water, most precious natural resource, is so dependent on the seasonality of our snowpack and our weather and temperatures and ability to store water in the snowpack.
Also just be public spaces in nature. Cause they can talk about accessibility and quality of it and preservation of it, acquisition of more. So
So I wanted to include some active language to that, like, I don't want it to be there's a nice looking hill over here, and there's a nice looking river over here, but we don't really engage with it.
Yeah, I think stewardship is a really active word. And then from the conservation world, just like so you guys know linguistically, conservation is a word that's used for the management of things that change over time. For example, you would conserve water, you wouldn't preserve water. Preservation is used for aspects that are more static, like you would preserve open space or conserve water or conserve wildlife habitat because it's so dynamic and changeable. Um, but yeah, I think, I think something I'm seeing in these buckets right now is gathering and sense of community. Oh, stewardship of public spaces and nature. Yeah. So I was going to say how it was written before, gathering and sense of community was really similar to the primary bucket, but I think stewardship of public spaces and nature um, does differentiate that quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's gonna sound corny, but I'm reading about the 1880s and the whole Wood River Valley. And Bellevue and Haley, currently in the chapters I'm reading, are getting some of the most talk about them. And I don't know if people knew, because I surely didn't, that Bellevue and Haley were vying for being the capital of the state when it was Alturas County before it became Blaine County. And how the population was so large in Bellevue. Granted, there were other little towns across the river and so forth. But all I'm trying to bring up is the history of our town. And where I'm going is often towns have a theme. And it doesn't have to mean a theme of the wrapper of the architecture, it doesn't mean we have to be a mining town, because that was a small boom or bust situation. But if you were to define the town that I grew up in, you would say it was the farmer's magnet town that had all the other 5 small towns that everybody came to the bigger town to do their shopping. It was the farmer's bigger town. And to me, I see that as Twin Falls. So I'm just trying to say, where do we talk about who we are, our heritage, and how it's sending us as what we want to be? What's our definition of the town? I'm trying to come up with that.
Yeah.
So where is that heritage or evolution covered?
I think in the sense of community part, I think is a good place to put that. And I also think that kind of needs to be woven through a lot. Where we came from, how we got here, or pieces here.
And does it influence in any way where we're growing?
Yeah, I mean, it has to, no way it doesn't.
Yeah, I'd be curious to know. I'm not sure if or I don't remember or recall if the surveys have addressed this or not, but like how important it is for the current Bellevue community to hold on to that agricultural heritage or that aspect of our heritage, not just in in an economic sense, but also in a land use sense and land use decisions for zoning. Because I could see, I mean, I think generally the trend is to embrace that heritage in coordination with the county and have more ag uses and low density land-based industries in the unincorporated county. But I don't know if I think that's a big question for Bellevue, the city, to ask and ask the community, get a clearer answer on. An example where kind of the city of Haley, for example, has diverged from that heritage and is with the use of Broadford. So when the city did annex like the northern parts of Broadford Road, there was a lot of backlash and conflict around that. And the Broadford community has been very vocal and clear in their desire to hold on to that agricultural heritage and have that reflected in their land uses. I imagine there's some sentiment like that. I haven't heard it as strongly or loudly from like the West Croy community, but I think when the city's prepared to host a conversation about that, it can lead to a more seamless transitions and evolution of and growth over time.
Yeah.
This is Carissa. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I just want to know on the heritage vocab. I think there's particularly in Bellevue, from what I've seen, there's a pretty strong sense of Latino heritage as well. And so it'd be interesting to just think through the interplay of like, okay, there's the heritage of, this land and the use of the land and the culture and people here who colonized or migrated, but then there's also more recent immigrants and migrants.
Great point.
I think some of that is just done like kind of naturally of its own on, say, like Main Street, you'll see 1890s and early 1900s structures that now host like Hispanic markets. And I think some of the public art opportunities that we could have in public spaces in the future could definitely be like a variety of styles and cultural motifs and stuff to show off cultural diversity in a lot of different ways.
I like that.
Could I just jump in with a quick comment to this group? I know this is coming out left field and an hour into the meeting. Just wanted to let you know this is Linnea, newcomer. I work at the Hunger Coalition. I am going to be taking Brooke McKenna's spot in showing up in these meetings, but unfortunately, really this just kind of happened yesterday, and I can't actually be here today, and I obviously have some homework to do to catch up to where you guys are at. So I just wanted to identify myself and say that I look forward to joining this and being prepared, and we'll shortly sign off, but that's who I am.
Well, awesome. You were already assigned homework before you got on, just so I'll be following up with you on that, but I think you guys could be a resource for us that has been identifying a couple different topics. So like I said, I'll talk to you one-on-one later.
Great, appreciate it. Okay, thanks you all. Have a good rest of your time.
Enjoy.
Bye-bye.
What percentage is, where can we find the data out of the Latin Hispanic community in Bellevue? Is it like 40%?
I tried really hard to dial in on a number.
But I guess the premise would be, the gut check would be, it's a large portion of our community. And therefore, I hate to say words that fall into like this standardized category, but it's like, where is our community center for supporting the 40% of our population, if it is a number like that, so that those folks almost like additionally claim this as their town and show it with the art, with the businesses. We've got the businesses, but how do we promote that even further, like pride of our community, you know? And so I know I've seen on the news, there is a community place for the Basque people in Boise, and it gets used greatly, and it's quite popular, and they have other seasonal events around it. It's almost like, gosh, how does we as a community acknowledge that and create that building, that venue, that location to promote that large portion of our community? You know, honor it, you know, share it with pride, promote it.
CC?
Sure, I have some numbers. It's been a while since I dug into this, but I do have some numbers on the demographics and split of people in the county that identify as Hispanic or Latino versus white. County-wide, I can send these to you in writing too, but county-wide, about just under a quarter of the population, according to the census, was reported as Hispanic or Latino. But when you look at that according to age, and according to the school district data, it's closer to 50% of the students in the Blaine County School District are Hispanic or Latino. Yeah, I'll send this to you. Cary, which has the county's youngest community, is already majority Latino. And I don't have Blaine County's numbers on Latino written down here. But as you guys are familiar with, median age in Bellevue is lower than median age in Haley and Ketchum. So presumably you guys would have lower numbers, but maybe not as higher numbers of Hispanic, Latino, if the trend is consistent, than Haley and Ketchum, but maybe lower than Cary. So I'll send you the resource, sources where I got those numbers from.
It sounds pretty much like the conclusion I came to as well, based on, census data. And caveating the census data, I think had like a 13% margin of error or something like that. That it fell into, because the American Community Survey since maybe 5 or 6 failures to a community this size. To get those numbers, but then the school district data is showing a lot higher, trending upward. I think 30 to 40% was the number that I kind of came up with.
I have in 2023 that 45.8% of students in Blaine County School District were Hispanic or Latino.
Yeah, and it was
Oh, but
49%
maybe
for Bellevue Elementary specifically. Yeah.
The thing that I would say as far as like community gathering spaces for the Hispanic community is the main goal, like I think I would have if I were the sole city person, is increasing Hispanic involvements in the city and civically, because we don't have a lot of representation on city council or planning commission or any of our like Parks Committee, I'd be definitely also struggle to get involvement in our surveys in Spanish, and there's not very many Spanish clicks on the website. Part of it is a lot of our documents and stuff are not Spanish and English. Part of it is just like a lack of trust, probably. I'm not really sure how to solve, but I think this could be a goal of a comprehensive plan to. There's a large subset of our community that does not engage civically to kind of further their own interests in the city.
yeah.
Right, I agree with that. Sorry, go ahead.
You can go ahead, Carissa.
Okay. Another thing that compounds it, and we should have the data in the demographic thing that Ryan's gonna send you, Ryan. But
Yeah, easily.
90% of elected and appointed officials are homeowners. And the ownership rate among the Hispanic community is substantially lower. It's a lot harder for people when they don't feel like they're fully grounded to actually engage civically. So I think there's like these layers of sort of barriers, and I agree, trying to come at it in a more creative way and foster relationships that will help promote. Like, I know, for example, Jane at the Hunger Coalition, you can chat with May about this. She's an organizer, and so she goes in for specific asks and targets, but part of the aim of her role is to help promote more engagement within the Latino and Hispanic community. So she'd be someone interesting to chat with, of like, how should we be approaching this? What are we missing? And she might even have some good introductions for if any of the electeds want to start fostering those sorts of relationships, or trying to identify, who might want to be on PNC. I think that could be fruitful.
So do you have a blip in the accommodating and diverse category? Or do we have a little sentence to cover this?
So I put under gathering and sense of community, intentionality, and civic engagement and representation.
Okay.
we definitely added the accommodating indoors as well. I think it fits in goals well.
You bold the section headings. I know they're larger and capitalized, but there we go. Then my eye sees the safety much better.
Alright, CC,
Yeah, I was gonna make the same points as Carissa did, that folks that are more stressed with access to basic needs or just on the day-to-day basis are going to be less willing or less available and eager to participate in these processes. And um, I think when I've had success engaging folks from underserved communities, it's usually because of like an interpersonal relationship that I've developed. And lately my jobs have had me less on the ground, boots on the ground in the community. But some spaces where it was fruitful for me to develop those interpersonal connections were around the Bloom Truck, in the Bellevue Library, and then just a lot of on the ground programming with mountain rides and answering the phone at mountain rides every day, trying to help people get from point A to point B. So yeah, I think also with the Bloom Truck, the Hunger Coalition part of the Bloom Truck's mission is to destigmatize hunger and the sharing of food. So I don't know if everyone knows this, but everyone's welcome to have a meal at the Bloom Truck. And for people who aren't stressed in their access to food, they like wholeheartedly welcome donations. So whether you want to like whether you know that'd be a good place for elected officials to go. And if they feel uncomfortable taking a free meal, they can pay what it would cost for them to prepare a meal from groceries or a little bit more, or just not, and just sit down and eat with whoever else is there.
That's a really good point, Cece. And the Hunger Coalition also does, I think it's just Thursdays, but it might be Monday and Thursdays where they have those lunches.
Yeah, that's right. I forgot they started that programming. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those are year round. Bloom Truck would just be more kid centric in the summer. I connected you, Brian, with two, or I sent an email just a couple minutes ago with uh, pointing out two longtime Bellevue residents that are native Spanish speakers and I think would be great to at least fill out a survey if they haven't already. And they would even be, they'd be great on the advisory committee as well. So I can keep thinking of other people like that who have been in the Bellevue community for a long time and are native Spanish speakers. And at least one of the people I recommended, I can vouch for her. She used to be a bus driver at mountain rides, and as a regular rider, I would see how many people she knew. So she might also have recommendations for other people to reach out to.
alright. Any other good thoughts? So I think next steps on this is I will do some wordsmithing on the vision statement. Write some paragraphish definitions of the key themes. Send that to you guys and the youth committee as well, for final thoughts, and then put together a survey of what the community thinks on it.
Do you think that'll be our November survey? You think?
I think it might be a special edition midstream insertion sort of a thing on. And so the back of the meeting packet is the flyer for the October survey. I encourage you all to take it and tell everybody, take it.
And you don't have to live in Bellevue to take it, so.
There's like, okay, any other thoughts?
It's all good. Good work, guys.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work on this.
Yeah, you're doing great.
And all of that, I think we'll wrap up. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Good to see you. Bye.